Thank you for joining our Tech Talk inside the CISO's office. I'm the producer, Lance Hart. Today we have a special guest, and I'm going to turn it over to John Bruggeman so he can introduce. John, take it away.
Welcome to Inside the CISO's office. I'm John Bruggeman, consulting CISO for CBTS, and with me today is Troy from EchoMark. Troy, I'll allow you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Lance and John. It's great to be here. A little bit of background about myself. I actually started my career, of all things, doing weapons research for the US government. And I did that for a number of years where I was exposed to a wide variety of classified information and the importance of protecting that information. After that, I joined Sony Corporation and built one of the very first digital video on demand systems for commercial aircraft. So if you've ever watched a movie or a TV show on a long flight, there's a good chance you're using a successor version of the product that I helped build.
Have I watched movies on a flight? That goes without saying. Yes. Well, that's cool that you've been a part of that. Continue, please.
We had many technological problems because when we built this, networks were still in their infancy, and rendering video on computers was still, a challenge. But probably the biggest challenge we had was protecting the very content itself from the insiders who, in some cases, might have wanted to pirate those movies or TV shows and put them on the internet.
Oh, yeah.
Then after that, I joined Microsoft, and I was at Microsoft for 25 years in a wide variety of product leader and engineering leader roles, and worked on just about every major product the company has ever produced, including every version of Windows since Windows 95 all the way through Windows 11. And during my time at Microsoft, once again, I got exposed to the deep challenges around security, including preventing insiders from doing things with intellectual property that they probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
And so what I decided to do is, after 25 years, I wanted to kind of complete my dream of building my own company. And what I did was I looked at the market and I saw how the market had done a great job really enhancing the privacy for individuals, but privacy for organizations was really being left behind. And over the last several years, you're seeing a rapidly growing number of leaks and intellectual property theft from organizations, really doing tremendous damage, damaging the information flow to those who need it, damaging the very organizations, their brand, the public trust that might exist in them. And I felt like we needed to address this problem so that information could continue to flow so everyone could do their best work, but still keep that private information private. So I went off and I formed EchoMark.
One of the things, when I saw your product it's probably 2 months ago by now, that I found very interesting was that whole concept of both privacy and being able to track a document and to know where a document may have been leaked from. But before we jump into that topic, I want to go back to your prior work where you were working with Sony to develop, the streaming platform for airlines, because I am aware of how the platforms work to a degree, but I also remember every video I ever watched, like a movie, a nearly first run movie had, like Delta, was somewhere inside the box so that you knew that if it appeared on some dark site, or some other streaming platform, that both the content owners of that movie as well as, the people that were distributing it, you made that watermark pretty obvious. So that's one way that people can track to see where did that content come from. So that was a pretty easy thing for you to do back then, I assume?
The visible watermark was easy. And, one of the things that I drew upon from my experience going all the way back to weapons research, doing this weapons research, I had access to some of the most classified information on the planet, deeply sensitive information about our adversaries and our own capabilities to defend against them. And when I received these files, this was back in the day, they were always in paper format.
Of course.
And I literally had to sign my name at the top of the document. And that act of me putting my name, my identification on that information, it changed how it made me think about being a steward of that information. It made me a better steward. And I saw it had a similar impact on my peers. And so I've always felt, is there a way to take that concept and bring it into the digital domain and make it easy for anyone to use? Now, the Hollywood studios, they're very sophisticated intellectual property owners.
Yes.
They're very, very good at it. And in addition to these visible watermarks, one of the things they were very insistent upon is creating invisible forensic watermarks, kind of buried in the audio and the video tracks of the content. And so while I was at Microsoft, we helped build a lot of these different technologies and deploy them, including in a DRM system that I helped build to protect streaming movie content over the internet that was eventually used by Netflix and Amazon and others to stream movies over the internet.
Yeah.
And that forensic watermarking in audio and video has been well used, well documented, very, very effective technique. But what was missing was, can you watermark anything? Can you watermark text? Can you watermark imagery and make it robust against someone literally taking out their personal cell phone and taking a picture of that information and leaking it on the internet? And so we felt we had an opportunity there to provide a new capability to organizations to help keep their private information private.
In my career as a cybersecurity professional and some of the certifications I had to study to get, steganography always caught my attention as a really interesting technology for embedding content inside some other file. I mean, the amount of white space, if you will, in a graphic image or even in a sound file that allows a threat actor, or in your case, someone who's trying to protect their digital rights and their intellectual property. There's a tremendous amount of white space in that graphic image or in that audio file or video file to allow you to embed some other content in there. And I thought the steganography part was very interesting, and that's what caught my attention about your product. So I'm interested to hear how you, to the degree that you can share, how you incorporate that into protecting documents from, or at least, like you said, putting a digital signature on those documents to be able to identify them later in case they are leaked out.
The first technique we use is we create an individualized digital stamp for each file that's unique for every recipient. And so that makes it such that if the person were to leak the full file, you would be able to determine the source of the leak. And it reminds me of a time when I was at Microsoft. We were experiencing our own leaks. Someone within the company was leaking pre-release builds of Windows, and we're trying to find out who this person was. And so we went in and we literally scribbled in the DLLs, a unique identifier that was specific to every person who downloaded an internal build of Windows, such that if they ever showed up on the internet, we would be able to immediately tell. And sure enough, we were able to use that technique and immediately find this person who was leaking the builds. They immediately confessed. Of course, we terminated the individual, and it kind of sent a message to everyone else in the organization of like, hey, if you do that, you're going to get caught.
Right.
So we knew there was a way to do this, and we also knew psychologically that if you want to prevent a bad act from happening, there's a variety of different theories around this. One theory is, well, ratchet up the punishment, but it turns out psychologists will tell you that is probably not the most effective way. The most effective way to deter a bad act is to convince the would-be bad actor they're going to get caught.
Yeah.
And so with the use of steganography and this concept of everyone has their own unique view of information, the likelihood that an individual feels emboldened to continue to leak that information, knowing that information, will drop way off. In fact, I've had experts tell me that they think 90% of the leaks that happen today could be prevented simply by knowing that your copy of information is unique to you.
Yeah, and let's go ahead and talk about that a little bit, because your product allows even someone to share, via email is typically the method that documents are shared these days, although it could also be done on SharePoint or on, OneDrive or on Dropbox or Box. Pick your favorite, file sharing tool. So describe a little bit how your product allows both Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, those types of documents that people would want to share for one reason or another, how your technology can be applied to individually identify them when they're shared out to employees typically inside your company, or perhaps to an external trusted third party?
Today, we basically have three distinct capabilities. We can integrate directly with email systems, both Google and Microsoft. We can provide a network file sharing capability, so you can share a file over a link, and everyone who accesses that link will get their own distinct copy of that information that's forensically watermarked. And some of the different ways that we mark the content to guard against the analog hole involves us creating very subtle visual changes to the text layout, not enough to harm the professionalism of the document, not enough for a human being to go, oh, that's where the EchoMark is, but more than enough for our computer vision to distinguish between John's copy versus Lance's copy versus Troy's copy, and do so very robustly. You know, we're robust against things like impersonation or distortion that might happen through the analog hole. And then the last technique that we offer is an API, where you know, if a third-party vendor wants to integrate EchoMark into their app, they'll soon be able to do that as well and forensically watermark views within their application.
Yeah, so you might want to say a little bit more about that API part of integration, because that part also surprised me as a capability. Most people, like if you're doing application development, wouldn't think, at least some people probably wouldn't think about, well, this user interface is unique and I want to sort of copyright it so that it doesn't get duplicated. Or, you know, maybe they're working on a release that's going to have a new feature. I can imagine the Apple environment, you know, Apple's very sensitive about their user interface and making sure it has a particular look and feel. So there's a way for your technology to watermark even how somebody sees that user interface.
That's right. And let me give you a couple examples of third-party applications that might some point want to incorporate forensic watermarking. Let's take the case of the industry sales leader, Salesforce, and their CRM system. And so you could imagine an employee pulling up a CRM record of some famous person and taking a picture of all of that information. Well, with our forensic watermarking capability, you would be able to know who did that. The same is true for the Epic healthcare system. The Epic is
huge.
vendor.
Yeah, that's a huge system. And there's tons of personally identifiable and, you know, personal health information in those systems.
That's right. And so being able to forensically watermark that information when it's displayed also has tremendous value in helping keep an organization's information private.
Yeah. And so in your experience for the customers that have deployed your technology, is there a awareness and training program that goes along with it that is handled by HR, or is it less obvious and more subtle? How is that usually handled for people in terms of, like you said, from a psychological standpoint, the prevention of the data leakage might help if it's well broadcast, but I suppose if you're looking for a mole, you may not bother to tell anybody.
That's right, John. And really the advice I give to customers is, if you're suffering an ongoing internal leak of information, use the product, but don't tell anyone. In fact, tell as few people as humanly possible, because you never know who is your leaker. And I'll share one story with you. One of our very first customers who deployed our email system last fall, they were suffering a chronic leak of their organization's information ending up in social media. And they quickly deployed EchoMark, and very quickly this person leaked again. They were able to use the tool to readily identify who the person was. They confronted the person, he admitted to it, and they terminated him. But I think the interesting thing about that scenario is that was a senior executive within that organization. That was not a low-level employee.
There's all sorts of scenarios, and Hollywood, I'm sure, would have a fun time creating a movie plot based on, you know, a technology like yours for doing the watermarking and the echo marking, if you will, of sensitive and confidential information. And then the big reveal that, you know, we know who it is, and it's, you know, everybody's in the same room, and the detective is walking around the room, and they point out that it's not the third level junior person that was doing it. It was the vice president of whatever. So Yeah.
That's right. You never know. Now, if your org is not suffering from a leak, we suggest just the opposite, kind of like you alluded to, and that is let everyone know. Let everyone know that their information is uniquely tied to them to create that deterrence. In fact, I had one CISO of a financial institution who said he's going to put it in their annual employee training. He wants everyone to know that this technology is being used to avoid anyone being tempted to take a picture or steal some content.
Yeah. I think with the healthcare industry, and that's a vertical I hadn't really considered, more the one, in my mind that comes quickly to mind is like police departments, with all the videos that police departments, have to release, but sometimes, they might take their time releasing and then suddenly it appears on social media and they're surprised at how quickly or, how did this supposedly confidential information get released. So there's multiple reasons people would utilize your technology to protect and or deter, compromising information going out.
That's right. And our view is any organization that has private information that they want to stay private could benefit from the use of steganography to protect that information and work towards this vision of every view of private information an individual has within an organization should be uniquely tied to their identity.
And as we think about how the technology works, some organizations are particularly when I consult with them, some organizations have intellectual property that they don't want anybody to see. So they will make sure that all of their resources are internal, and they will have very good protection around their internal data center and who has access to what. And when I was looking at the demo, you do have an option for hosting your application internally. So for organizations that want to keep it internal, they can do that.
That's right. We provide a variety of quality controls and usage controls. So you can keep things internal, you can prevent printing, you can prevent copying and pasting, or you can leave those things on so that you don't get in the way of legitimate use cases as well. One of the things we discovered in working on all of this was sometimes leaks or theft never make it into the public.
Right.
It's simply information flowing to a competitor or an adversary, and the damage is done, but you don't always know. You don't have visibility into that.
Why am I losing all these bids?
Yeah, and so one of the approaches we took, and in fact, we give this advice to our customers, is you should really consider avoiding the use of email attachments going forward. Email attachments just have a bunch of problems when it comes to private information. You create a copy that's now resident on all the devices that exist out there. It could be exfiltrated to yet another organization or copied off to a USB drive. From a data retention policy perspective, you may or may not have control over that. There's just a lot of problems with email attachments. So what we created is, and what we advocate is the use of network file sharing, but we went one step further. And that is, what if you just get a view into your information? What if you can just read and consume the information, but you can't save the file, you can't print it, you can't give it to someone else. Only you can view your own view of that information. And that's been really popular with a lot of CISOs who are dealing with especially sensitive information that they fear is getting in the hands of competitors. And the great thing about this view concept is we also have telemetry to know, okay, who looked at it? And did they
if Bob says he reviewed it, and then you're like, well, it's interesting. We don't see that you actually accessed that view, not to pick on everybody named Bob out there, but yeah.
That's right. And the way we built it is we wanted to make it natural. So an organization can literally say, you know what? For any DLP content that's marked confidential or higher, we're not even going to let someone send it out of the organization or send it to anyone as an attachment. We're going to auto convert it over to a view so that you can view it in your web browser. You don't need any client software, but you can't share it with anyone else. You have to go back to the publisher to get access. And I think that added control really can help clamp down on data exfiltration.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, one of the difficulties with data loss prevention in general is the first problem is people don't know where their data resides. So, and if the data resides in more than one place, it's probably wrong in one of those two places or three or four places where the data resides. So having a different thought process, and this will take time for it to percolate out to get people to start to think about different ways of sharing confidential information with the people they have to.
Yep, and that's what we really hit on was for a lot of information, a lot of very confidential information, the reader only needs to consume it. They're not collaborating on it. They need access to be informed. And so in that particular case, sharing files through attachments or even network file sharing is overkill. You're giving too much access to this very sensitive information. And this concept of being able to securely view information without downloading the file, I think is new to the market. And it's an idea hiding in plain sight. It's an obvious way to solve a real security problem around data.
Like you said, the idea of sharing just views is an idea, like you said, that was in plain sight that people hadn't taken advantage of. The watermarking of files that are then, either emailed out or the application view. Are there other areas that you think people need to be made aware of as they're trying to secure their environments?
The thing that we did with both attachments and with network file sharing is we automatically apply the watermarking. The end user doesn't need to know or care anything about that. In fact, that's one philosophy that we have is these security technologies, in order for them to be effective, they can't get in the way of legitimate use cases, or you're going to have so much end user backlash, you're going to get forced to turn them off. So the less intrusive you can make them, the better. A lot of the technologies that try and monitor end users and guess what they're doing and determine whether or not it's nefarious behavior, I think there's some problems with that technology around false positives, identifying something, doing something wrong, when instead of them doing something wrong, maybe they're your best employee who is kind of going the extra mile to try and put together some new capability. Organizations today already suffer from dampened creativity. And when you start to impose more and more controls on people doing what is a legitimate act, you can further harm that creativity and that entrepreneurship. So you have to be careful with these security technologies that you don't ultimately change the culture of the org and harm everyone.
And for some organizations, it would be a culture shift to have this thought that, oh my gosh, every document that I'm trying to share is going to be tied to me personally. But if they're dealing with confidential information, they should understand that it's confidential and it's a limited group that should have access to it. Hopefully that message is more easy for people to understand. But in your experience, has that been the case? Or like with your example from Microsoft, where you were literally marking the DLL, and tying it to a developer, was that something that surprised people, or is that something that people expected?
Some people already expect that this is happening. They thought it was always happening, and the reality, is in many cases it's not yet happening. We've had privacy experts from organizations, both in the government, on the commercial side, kind of look at our approach and have them say, you're doing nothing wrong here. All you're doing is give everyone a unique copy. And in fact, in some cases, this already happens depending on the sophistication of the organization. And now the tracking aspects, that has a whole different unique set of privacy concerns. But forensic watermarking of the content, the feedback we've gotten is it's entirely reasonable and end users understand it, and it starts to change their behavior.
Right. And for organizations that have extremely sensitive or even classified information, that could be very critical to, I'm not even talking about like a CMMC, assessment, making sure that you're doing things that the Department of Defense wants you to do, which is, of course, controlled, unclassified information. And we're talking about more of the classified or secret or top secret kinds of information. It seems like you have an opportunity to help out a lot of organizations. Is there anyone that vertical in particular, has been more successful for you at this point?
The verticals that where we've seen the largest initial traction is certainly in financial services, certainly in consumer products. We've had some mobile operators that have been interested. And then on the public sector side, it's really name your government agency. Because the government has all of this private information, and whenever that private information leaks, whether it was the leak in the Supreme Court of the Dobbs report that overturned Roe v. Wade, whether it was Airman Texera leaking all these Pentagon papers and these daily intelligence briefings, causing tremendous damage with our allies and informing our adversaries. There's so much awareness of the damage that these public leaks can do. So there's tremendous interest in applying forensic watermarking to help protect these assets. But if you take kind of a long ball view of all of this, I would say, again, any organization that has private information would want to consider the use of forensic watermarking to protect their private information.
Certainly makes sense. We're coming up to the end of our time here. I wanted to see if there was anything else that you might want to mention to make people aware of as far as how the technology can help them with either their data privacy or, their data integrity.
Yeah, the last story I'll share is, we have a variety of watermarking techniques. We have ones that are visible. We have ones that are hidden through formatting and other slight changes, either to the text or the imagery or even the audio and video. But there was one technique that we developed that was particularly interesting, and this involved what we call CEO emails. When a CEO of a large organization sends out an email to everyone in the company, inevitably these emails leak. And you can see it as one example. Tim Cook sent out an email that was leaked to the press. And so we took a close look at this based on a challenge I got from one of our customers. And they said, hey, it's great that you can guard against taking a picture of the screen or a paper printout. And it's great that you can guard against copy and pasting of a paragraph of information. But what if the leaker is so driven, they literally retype the message into another computer? Then clearly you have no capability, right?
Ah, okay, yeah.
And so we thought about that problem for a while, and we said, actually, we do have a solution. And what we do automatically is when you go to send an email, we can automatically rephrase each email so that John's version of the email that he gets in a group email, it still looks and feels like a group email. John's email will have slightly different wording than Lance's email or Troy's email. And so as a result, we basically use different words to say the same thing that are unique to each recipient. And this scales all the way up to, literally everyone on the planet. You could send an email to all 8 billion people, and they would all get a slightly different reworded version of that email. So that if it gets typed into another computer and put on Business Insider or wherever it might be, you can immediately identify the source.
That would get people's attention. It's good to know that these tools are out there, and CISOs need to understand the tools that they need to have in their quiver, so to speak, in their arsenal to protect against threats like this. Frequently, I'm more talking to companies that are on the defensive side, firewall vendors, MDR vendors, network intrusion detection, network intrusion prevention. And this one on the data, loss prevention, if you will, although really it's more data leakage in a sense. It's a good arrow to have in your quiver for sure. Troy, I appreciate your time. It's been great talking with you. I look forward to hearing what else you guys come up with over the next weeks and months ahead.
All right. Thanks, John. Thanks, Lance.